I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm joined by Mike Jones, one of the writers of the new Pixar movie Soul, which is currently streaming on Disney Plus. Mike, the first thing I want to ask you about is what was the collaboration process like between you and the other writers, Pete Docter and Kemp Powers? Because I know that when you see multiple screenwriters, sometimes it's not always like they're not always working together in conjunction. And I was curious what that process was like.
Yeah. Well, it's very intense and it's deeply collaborative. It's also deeply collaborative with all the story artists there. I mean, you can't work at Pixar in a silo. You know, you can't just sit in your office and write your screenplay. Somebody's going to come knocking on your door and want to collaborate, it's great, you know. And with it started off early with Pete just had an idea. You know, he had an idea that he wanted a movie set beyond space and time where souls are given their personality, and that's all he had at the time. And so I kind of felt my job was to take that idea and start populating it with characters that could drive a plot and to kind of frame it within a movie, 3-act structure, 4-act structure. I feel like that's my job at Pixar, is to take these concepts from these directors and kind of put it into a movie and show them how it can give it longevity in a way, right? And so Pete and I worked on it for a long time together, and so we had the foundation of it down. And then when we decided that we wanted the character to be a jazz musician in his 40s and a middle school band teacher who's Black, we decided to look for a collaborator, and that's where we found Kemp Powers.
How long ago did he first come? Did he first come with this idea to you?
This was June of 2016 when I had my very first meeting with him. And we worked on it very closely together. And then Kemp came on about 2 years later. And that was just, because it took that long to kind of get that idea around that corner. I mean, in the beginning, the idea was Joe was an actor and he had just gotten his big break on Broadway. And he was trying to get back to it, right? And but that just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right for the main character to be an actor for some reason. And also, I love jazz, and so does Pete. And the idea of folding jazz into it came a little bit later down the road. But when that idea took, we loved it. So and then, like, you know, I would say, you know, it even changed points of view at sometimes during those 2 years. We decided to try it out from 22's point of view, that the entire movie is set in the U seminar where 22 has been avoiding to go to Earth, and suddenly this soul who doesn't want to die kind of gets handcuffed to her, and so all of these different ways are just us trying to find what that foundation is, and we're kind of lucky that we have years to find it, you know.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up that both you and Pete have such a love for jazz. You know, it comes across so clearly and beautifully in the film that there's such a love for just music itself, but jazz in particular. And I'm curious, how did you come to show that appreciation through this movie? How did you come to bring that from your perspective?
Well, I mean, like I said, we were trying it with this other way, and like this actor, and we didn't feel like that character bringing his acting into the movie would be that visually enhancing or that sonically enhancing. And so we always were talking about jazz, and so one day we just happened, well, what if it were jazz? And the idea of making it jazz and also making it a pianist in particular, Pete loved that idea because suddenly he got all of these ideas on how to animate the hands, right? Because Pete is a born animator. He's a student of animation, and the idea of actually animating those hands at the right notes was really fascinating to him. So, and then it was kind of a matter of, well, what kind of jazz do we want? And we started to kind of put feelers out wide and far for all kinds of music, right? And Aaron Deal was a big influence for us, and Herbie Hancock was a big influence for us, and you know, and not just jazz pianists. Terry Lynn, one of our a jazz drummist who's on our cultural committee as well. so once jazz started to kind of make its way in the movie, jazz is it's such an important American art form that we felt like we needed to do it justice. And so we spent a lot of time figuring that out.
Well, I can tell you, I think you definitely did, probably outside of Ken Burns's, you know, whatever 72-hour epic that he did about that. This is definitely a solid appreciation of it.
Good.
What I think is also interesting is we were talking. I was talking to you about this briefly before we started recording. Was you actually have a background in film journalism, having served as an editor for Filmmaker magazine and our sister publications of Variety and IndieWire. How did you make your way from writing about film to actually writing films?
Well, I went to film school. I went to NYU Film School, and I went there as a cinematographer. I wanted to shoot movies. And one of my writing teachers, because you have to take a writing course, took me aside and said, you know, you can write and you should consider maybe screenwriting. And so it was hard enough to get cinematography jobs. And so I happened upon Filmmaker magazine as their special projects manager, essentially the guy that handles sponsorship deals and stuff like that. And there was just another level of education there for me. I mean, I had already been immersing myself in a lot of art and independent movies, but to be at Filmmaker magazine in the mid 90s was to watch a different sort of emergence of the American independent film movement. And I loved it. And it kind of gave me a front row seat to that. And because I could, you know, put my thoughts on paper, you know, to a certain extent, Scott McCauley started to have me write, and then I became the managing editor of Filmmaker, always on the side writing screenplays and always just trying to, you know, send them out and get them into the right hands. I mean, it took years to get any sort of foothold in terms of a screenwriting career. But all those years were me writing for Filmmaker, and then I became the executive editor of IndieWire for a short period of time too, until finally one of my scripts got the notice of a manager, and then I was able to kind of start to make a career as a working screenwriter. You know, and I didn't make a lot of money, but I made enough money to kind of get by year to year. You know, but I loved those early years as a journalist because, you know, in the mid 90s, people were just doing it, and this idea that you could just go make a movie, while a lot of people have been doing it for decades prior, was kind of it had hit a zeitgeist at that moment. And I was writing stuff and that I thought I would go shoot, that I thought I would go make, because everybody else was doing it, and it just seemed like that's what you did. And I love that spirit, right? And so all the stuff I was writing, I wasn't writing studio movies. I wasn't trying to be a studio screenwriter. I was trying to be an independent screenwriter. And I think the influence of that of my early career as a journalist contributed that a great deal.
So it's interesting that you are that you've been working for Pixar. I think the trademark of most Pixar movies is how they reach people on such a personal level. It feels like Pixar must have some sort of voodoo priest or something in terms of how they always seem to get, you know, me and almost everybody on that level. Were there any personal experiences from your life that ended up influencing part of the story of Soul?
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was on Soul for 4 years, and in the middle of it, my father passed away, and he was in a nursing home, and it was a kind of a slow fade for him. And so I would fly from the Bay Area to Texas to go be with him, but every month, twice a month, as much as I could, because I knew that time was running out. We were very close. He loved movies. He was my first introduction to movies, my first introduction to R-rated movies, you know. And so we both shared this love when maybe we didn't have a whole lot in common. We had movies in common. And so, you know, when he finally passed away, it was when I was writing a scene. I don't want to spoil it. Can I spoil? Will people have already seen the movie?
I certainly hope so, but we can at least say spoiler alert, and they can skip forward, 30 seconds.
Well, there is a there's a point in the movie when Joe brings out all of these objects from his pocket that 22 has been collecting and plays them on his piano. And that is a moment that's kind of inspired by me going through my father's belongings after he passed, because all of these objects would have this wonderful charge to them. And it made me remember this time when I was sitting next to him, and as he was passing away, and as I held his hand, I would think about, what is he thinking about at this moment? You know, what's the most important thing to him as he looks back on his life? Is it failure? Is it his success? Or is it maybe the fact that his son is next to him and holding his hand, you know? And I certainly felt that was going to be the most important moment in my life, despite whatever success I had as a screenwriter, whatever success Soul has, that this moment will be the most important to me. And I instantly put that into Joe. You know, that was, it fed right into what we wanted to say, with what Joe comes to understand, what it means to live a fulfilled life. So that moment affected the movie deeply. Yeah.
Another thing that Pixar does so well is the way it casts its movies. And I think you guys have an incredible cast led by Jamie Foxx as Joe and Tina Fey as 22. And I think probably one of the more inspired choices with Irish talk show host Graham Norton as Moonwind, which was a very pleasant surprise for me as a fan of his show. I'm curious as to how these casting choices came about.
Well, we with Jamie Foxx, we were looking for, in writing a middle school band teacher who is desperate to get his shot, right? You can, that character starts to kind of bend towards somebody being a little bit morose as they teach kids, or maybe not wanting to be there, right? And we just didn't want that. We wanted actually Joe, for whenever he talked about jazz, to light up, whether he's playing it or whether he's talking to kids about it, right? And Jamie Foxx came to us, and or the idea came to us, and we started to kind of put Jamie Foxx's voice from other movies against Joe, some early animatics of Joe, and it just lit up. I mean, Jamie found humor and exuberance and electricity in Joe when he's in that basement teaching kids who can't hold a tune or keep a beat how to play jazz. He's still so excited about it. And that's what we wanted, right? We wanted the character just to be alive, no matter what's in front of him, in a way, when he's talking about what his passion is. And so I thought once we had Jamie, you start writing with that voice in your head, you start writing for Jamie Foxx. And it was such a gift. With Graham in particular, I had no idea how Moonwind was going to come across. The thing that you need Moonwind to come across as is he's totally authentic and honest, you know, and that he's totally himself, and he's not putting on some kind of like crystal, you know, aura or about him. Like he's not, he's you want to just believe it because he's such a wonderful goofball. And I didn't peg Graham Norton as the kind of actor who could tap into that, and he did it so well. I just think that it was such a wonderful, it was so fortunate for us to find Graham, to be honest, because I as I was writing Moonwind, I guess I don't know how you make this not cheesy. And he did it once we had Graham, and once you had that voice in his head, and once like he would say all these lines with 110%, you go like, all right, great, I got it, I got that tone, I got that cadence, and now we're gonna just write all of this for Graham. It was great. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mike, so much for joining us today. We wish you all the best over the upcoming awards season. And to all of our viewers, please like this video, smash that subscribe button, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, Charlie.